Hey there, viewers. Some places are built to inspire, but beneath the surface, not everything is what it seems. A former staff member has come forward with chilling claims about what they saw in the underground tunnels beneath Oprah's school, and even now, they say the memory still terrifies them. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. They said it was just a school. Name's Carla. Been working electrical systems since I got out of the Army in '06. Nothing fancy. I ain't no engineer or whatever, but I know how to read a panel and follow a feed, and that's usually all people want. Mostly get gigs through contract lists or old buddies who know I don't ask too many questions. I ain't into politics. I'm not on social media. I don't do interviews. I got bills, and I got skills. That's my life. This one came through a guy named Lou. Quiet fella I knew from Fort Benning. We crossed paths a couple times when I was rewiring base housing, and he remembered I could handle weird layouts. Called me up one afternoon. Didn't even say hello. Just, "You got boots and tools ready?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Private job. 2 weeks max. Good pay. You'll be in Georgia. Don't ask where until you land." I should have asked more, but he was paying double my normal rate, and I hadn't had steady work in months. They flew me out on a red-eye to Savannah, stuck me in a private van with no logo, just a dude with wraparound sunglasses who didn't say a word for the whole 3-hour ride. It was all trees, thick Georgia pine leaning in from both sides like they were watching us go by. No towns, no gas stations, just dirt roads and those damn trees. Then the forest thinned out and we were there. The place didn't look like a school, not at first. From the outside, it looked like a cross between a FEMA warehouse and a fancy retreat center. Real clean lines, fresh paint, but zero signs. No flag, no name, no students. Just a long stretch of concrete walls wrapped in silence and heat. There were cameras, though, everywhere, and guards who looked ex-military, standing just far enough apart to make you feel like they weren't watching you, even though they definitely were. They brought me through the side, not the front. Had to badge through 4 doors before I even saw the inside. It was cold, colder than it should have been for Georgia in July. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, not too loud, but just enough to feel wrong. A woman in a beige suit met me by the security checkpoint, said her name was Marla. She handed me a black lanyard with no name on it, just a laminated badge that read Access Level C. "You'll be working alone," she said, like it was a favor. "This is a dormant facility. No students currently. You're just assessing. No reports, no uploads. Just walk the tunnels, trace the lines, and give us a verbal confirmation once you're done." I asked, "Why does a school need underground tunnels?" She blinked, then smiled. "It was originally a government installation. Missile communications back in the day. We repurposed it. Think of it as a storm-safe lower level." Then she leaned in a little too close. "You do your job, you get paid. You document anything? You don't." I nodded. That's how some people like it. No paper trail, makes them feel safer. I don't care either way, long as I get what's owed. They gave me a gear card and an old blueprint folder. The blueprints were aged, edges curled and yellowing like they hadn't been touched in decades. Most of it didn't make sense. Half the wings were marked with shapes instead of numbers. Circles, triangles, hourglasses. I figured it was some internal code they hadn't bothered to update. That happens more often than people think. Big money, small brains. The first time I descended into the tunnels, I'll be honest, I felt it. That weird tightness in the chest, the kind you get when you know you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. I told myself it was just stale air or nerves. Happens sometimes. But looking back, it wasn't that. It was the way the place breathed. The stairs down were metal-grated, steep, and long. Took 15 minutes just to get to sub-level 1. Every step echoed too loud, like the walls weren't just bouncing sound, they were listening. When I got to the bottom, I was met with a long hallway, low ceiling, Walls lined with exposed conduit and peeling paint. No windows, no daylight, just industrial bulbs strung out like Christmas lights, flickering every 10 feet. The smell hit me first. Mildew and something older, something sweet but wrong, like rotted fruit or dried blood that'd been scrubbed too hard. There was dust, but it wasn't normal dust. It clung to everything like static, even when I brushed it away, made my arms itch. I started tracing the power lines. Most of the wiring was old, way older than anything you'd use for a school, thick copper cores wrapped in cloth. Whoever had built this place hadn't meant it for classrooms. They meant it to survive something. I followed the main conduit down the east wing, checked breakers, logged voltages in my notebook. Nothing out of spec, but it all felt overpowered. Like too much juice was being pushed through for no reason. And then, I heard it, faint, behind the walls. Not mechanical, not like AC or ductwork or transformers. This was different. Organic, almost. Low and steady, like someone holding a single note through a closed mouth. I put my ear to the panel. The hum didn't get louder. It got clearer, like it wanted to be heard, but only if you knew how to listen. I kept moving, told myself I was tired, told myself maybe there was a server room nearby. Those things sometimes make weird noise when the grounding's off. But the hum followed me, down the second corridor, into a smaller maintenance wing, always just behind the wall, right where the wires disappeared. At one point, I found a small break in the wall where conduit fed through a sealed metal hatch. The hatch had no handle, no lock, just a faded stencil over the top. Looked like a pencil snapped in half. I didn't know what to make of it. I took a picture with my flip phone, but the screen went black as soon as I snapped it. Battery fried, never turned back on. I kept working. Didn't have a choice. Wasn't about to lose that paycheck over some buzzing wall and a busted phone. I stuck to the assignment. Trace the lines. Report the feed. Keep my mouth shut. That night, back at the facility's sleeping quarters, a single prefab trailer about a mile down the road, I sat outside on the steps with a warm beer and a cold gut. I couldn't stop thinking about the hum, about that smell, about the way my tools vibrated just a little too much when I touched the panel in that east wing, like something was pushing back. I looked up at the stars, quiet sky, no sound but wind in the trees. Then I heard the bell, faint, like it was underwater. A single chime, then nothing. Next morning, I asked the security guard, older guy, heavy mustache, clearly a vet, if the school had any kind of bell system installed. He looked at me real slow, then said, "This place don't call kids, it holds them." I tried to laugh it off. He didn't smile, just walked away. By the third day, I stopped sleeping. The hum had moved. I could hear it in the ceilings now, above the power closet, inside the junction boxes, and sometimes, only sometimes, I thought I heard voices underneath it, like someone talking backwards through a fan, soft, slow, steady. I didn't record it, couldn't. My equipment wouldn't hold a charge anymore. Nothing worked more than an hour before dying. Even the lights on my cart dimmed when I walked past that first stairwell now. But I kept working, because that's what you do when the job is wrong but the pay is right. You lie to yourself. You say it's just old wiring, just echo, just mold. You don't think about what's really down there. Not yet. Not until the doors open. And by then, it's too late. Chapter 2. The lesson must be learned. I went back the next morning with a new set of gloves, a backup voltmeter, and a fresh lie in my mouth. I told myself what I'd seen in the tunnels was just old infrastructure doing what old infrastructure does, breaking down, glitching, hissing in the dark. But that hum was still in my ears, like it had sunk behind my eyes. I felt it more than I heard it now. I didn't mention it when I checked in. Marla asked how things were going, and I told her the truth she wanted. Looks fine, just some overpowered circuits. Might need redistribution. She smiled like she already knew what I'd say. I didn't go to the east wing first. I followed the south corridor this time, one that dipped deeper underground, where the air got heavy and close. The walls changed the farther in I went. Less concrete, more tile, like parts of this place had once actually been a school. The air smelled like chalk and damp wood, real old school stuff. I passed a couple of steel doors with the hinges rusted out, and one double door with the words storage scratched into it, with what looked like a key. I didn't stop. Down near the end of the corridor, I found them. Rooms. Maybe 6 in total. No numbers on the doors, just plain gray metal, like everything else down here. I opened the first one. That's when I realized what I was looking at. Classrooms, or what was left of them. Each room had about 12 desks, all bolted to the floor. Not regular desks either, heavy steel ones shaped like half cages. The chairs didn't move. No wheels, no flex, just straight backs and 2 short seats like they were meant to keep kids still. There were no windows, no signs of posters, no coat hooks, nothing that'd say a kid was ever meant to feel comfortable here. The walls were a pale green, the kind that hospitals use to try and calm people. Didn't work. The whiteboards were gone. Not just removed, ripped clean, bolts and all. You could still see the outlines where they used to be, the lighter paint behind them like shadows of what once was. On one of the walls near the corner, someone had tried to paint over something, but the paint didn't stick quite right. When I got close, I could still read what was underneath, just barely. The lesson must be learned. It wasn't big, not spray-painted like graffiti, just scratched into the plaster with something sharp. The letters were uneven, almost panicked, but it was there, and it felt deliberate. I stood there longer than I should have, just staring at those words. My hand rested on the panel by the door without thinking. The metal was warm. Too warm. I popped it open and started tracing the wiring. That's when I saw the first speaker. It was mounted up in the far corner, half tucked into the ceiling, not visible unless you knew to look. Old box style, the kind they used in public schools back in the 70s. Just a square mesh with exposed screws. The wire fed back into the ceiling. I followed it across 3 rooms, then found the access panel behind a ventilation grill. Pulled it open, and what I saw didn't make sense. The system wasn't live. I mean, technically the wires were intact, but there was no input source, no control panel, no sound deck, just raw power. And according to my meter, the circuit was dead during the day, but at exactly midnight, the draw spiked. Not a lot, just enough to turn something on for maybe 5 seconds, then nothing. The loop reset itself every 23 minutes. I checked 3 separate spots, same draw, same timing, same pattern. It didn't matter what I disconnected. By the time I returned, the wires had heat again. Something was feeding power into the silence. I found a 4th room, farther down the hall, locked. The door had no knob, just a recessed panel with a sliding plate covering a keypad. I'd seen that symbol before. A triangle. Inside it, a broken pencil. Same one I saw near the wall panel that killed my phone. I stared at it for a while. No way to open it without tools I didn't have. I touched the door anyway. It felt like a refrigerator, ice cold, even though the rest of the hall was still warm from the outside heat bleeding in. That's when I heard the tapping. It was light, gentle, rhythmic, like someone tapping a pencil against a desk on the other side of the wall. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. I froze, turned my head, trying to find the source. It was coming from above me, through the ceiling vent. I stepped under it and waited. Tap, 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 tap. Then nothing. I backed away and tried to pretend it hadn't happened. But the same tapping started up again 3 rooms down. Same rhythm, same vent. No footsteps, no doors opening, just sound, moving. It wasn't mice, it wasn't settling pipes, it wasn't anything normal. It followed me. Not fast, not loud, just following. I finished my walkthrough as best I could, taking voltage readings with shaky hands. In the control closet, I found the main power routing board for that wing. I thought maybe I could trace it, figure out what was running that audio loop. That's when I noticed the reset log. The panel had a built-in memory, a glitch counter to help with load balancing. Every time the system surged or dropped unexpectedly, it logged it. I expected a few anomalies. Old circuits do that, but there were hundreds. Every 23 minutes, the system had been cycling. Not just the audio feed, the whole wing, lights, outlets, junctions, all reset to baseline, then came back on as if nothing had happened. Except it wasn't scheduled. There was no control software, no server to automate it, no timer. Its response. I stood there staring at the log file, trying to make sense of what it meant. The only conclusion I could come to was the one that made the least sense. Something was triggering it, and it wasn't me. That wing was responding to presence. I left everything as I found it and climbed back to the surface. When I reached the upper hallway, I noticed something different. My lanyard was gone. The badge. The one they gave me. I hadn't taken it off. Marla was waiting for me at the end of the corridor. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "Huh, everything all right down there?" she asked. I nodded, slow. Just old wires. Some weird behavior in the breakers, but manageable. She handed me a new badge. Same laminate, different color. Didn't ask why. She didn't explain. I walked back to the trailer through the gravel lot, trying not to look at the trees. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up with a flashlight and my notebook, flipping through sketches of the circuit layout, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But the only thing that kept circling in my mind wasn't wiring. It was that phrase, "The lesson must be learned." Like it wasn't a warning, like it was a promise. Chapter 3. Only she could speak. There was an old admin wing on the north end of the facility they hadn't told me to check, but I'd seen it marked faintly on the older blueprints. A little gray box off to the side with no door access from the main schematic. The hallway leading to it was blocked by a metal rack full of broken monitors and wiring harnesses. Looked like someone had tried to hide the entrance with junk. But the rack wasn't bolted down, just heavy. Moved it without thinking too hard. The hallway was short, carpeted, and smelled like printer toner and mildew. Fluorescent lights still flickered above, barely. I passed a few office doors, all shut, most with warped wood or flaking handles. Room 2A still had a sticky note on the door that said, "Budget approvals, final review." Dust thick enough to pinch between 2 fingers. I found the office at the end wider, with a higher ceiling and a nameplate snapped off halfway. Inside, everything looked like it had been left in a rush. Papers scattered across the floor, chair pushed back from the desk, file drawers half open, but nothing had been touched in years. There was no power in this wing anymore, so I worked by flashlight. What struck me was how quiet it was in here. The humming, the tapping, even the weird temperature shifts I'd felt before, none of that followed me into this room. It was like the rest of the building didn't know this office still existed. I approached the desk, big and old, solid oak, not the metal kind you usually find in government buildings. I pulled open the center drawer, half expecting a nest of roaches or a stack of dusty reports. What I found was organized, precise. Inside were 6 manila folders, all unmarked except for a tiny symbol printed in the upper right corner of each. Symbols I didn't recognize. One was an hourglass, one a downward-pointing triangle, one a closed eye. Another was a spiral, drawn in what looked like pencil, but too clean to have smudged over time. The folders weren't labeled with names, dates, or departments, just those symbols, nothing else. Behind the folders, pressed flat against the drawer bottom, was a black plastic case. VHS, the kind you haven't seen in years. Thick, heavy, with that grainy plastic texture. No label, just a piece of red tape sealing it shut, and the words scratched into the front with what must be a paperclip or knife. Only she could speak. Below that, in faded black marker, Oral Exams, Room C. I stared at it for a long time. I don't know why I didn't leave it. I should have. But I didn't. I slipped it into my bag, stuffed the folders back the way I found them, and left the office without looking back. That night, in my trailer, I dug through my gear bag until I found the old USB converter I used for video diagnostics back in the day. Still worked, somehow. Took a minute to rig it through my laptop. The VHS looked half dead. The tape reels were tight and the case groaned when I slid it into the player. But it played. At first, nothing. Just black screen and static. Then grainy footage flickered to life. A room. Square. White walls. Bright overhead lights. A single metal table in the center, and 5 desks arranged in a semicircle around it. 5 girls sat there, all dressed in identical gray uniforms. Long sleeves, no buttons, hair pulled back tight, no accessories. All silent. There was a speaker in the corner of the room, mounted on the ceiling. That's where the voice came from. A woman's voice. Calm, measured, no accent. Almost too perfect. "Commence session," she said. The girls didn't respond. Didn't blink, just stared forward, like they were trying not to breathe too loudly. "Question 1, the voice continued. "Repeat the statement. She watches. You remember?" Still no response. The camera zoomed slightly, mechanical, not handheld. All angles were locked. The voice repeated, a little slower. "Repeat the statement. She watches. You remember." One of the girls, far left, blinked hard, like she was holding back tears. Another shifted her hands slightly under the desk, but none of them spoke. The voice didn't change tone, it just moved on. Question 2. What is the meaning of silence? A pause. Question 3. What do you become when you speak? The girls sat there, frozen. One of them started to cry. Not loud, not messy, just quiet, slow tears rolling down her face, like she wasn't allowed to wipe them away. The camera panned slightly, showing the corners of the room. Bare. No clocks, no writing, just white paint and bolted fixtures. Then the voice called out, "Student 4, repeat the lesson." The camera zoomed in on the girl in the center seat. She looked no older than 12. Her mouth trembled. She glanced toward the corner of the room, toward where the speaker was mounted, and whispered something I couldn't make out. The screen glitched. Not just a static jump, it bent, like the signal itself got pulled sideways. The girl's face blurred for a second, smeared across the frame, like someone had dragged a finger across wet paint. The tape hissed, then screeched, then cut to static. I hit pause. The screen froze mid-glitch. Her face was still warped, and behind her head something looked like it was moving in the corner. A blur, nothing distinct. I rewound, tried again, same thing. The tape was corrupted, but only in that moment, the second she spoke. I sat back in the chair, heart pounding. The room around me felt too quiet. The air didn't move. The lights buzzed softly, but I couldn't hear them anymore. Just that voice. "Repeat the statement." I played the beginning again, watched their faces, watched the way their eyes didn't move from the center of the room, like they were waiting for something, or someone. But the only person who ever made a sound was the woman behind the speaker. And maybe the girl who whispered, just once. But that was enough to break the tape. I didn't sleep that night. I left the player running with the tape on pause just to see if anything else would flicker back on. But it didn't. I sat there in the dark, watching static dance across my laptop screen, listening to the silence and thinking about what the voice had asked. What do you become when you speak? I never did find the rest of the footage. And even if I don't think I could watch it. Chapter 4. The curriculum wasn't for them. I didn't go back to work the next morning. I sat in the trailer with the VHS still on my table, the image of that girl's warped face frozen in my head like it had been burned there. I must have stared at the player for 3 hours, trying to tell myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't my problem. I was just an electrician, just a contractor doing what I was told. But the voice, her voice, it kept looping in my head, smooth and steady, like she was still talking from somewhere behind my ear. When I finally showed up back at the compound, I didn't clock in right away. I walked past the south corridor like I was heading to the maintenance rooms, but I didn't stop there. I took the long hallway, the one nobody used anymore, toward the western wing. On my first day, it had been sealed off. Storage only, they'd said. Power was supposed to be cut. I remember because I checked the sub-panel myself. The breakers were dead. But this time, as soon as I got close, I felt it. That warmth in the walls, that buzz under the floor, the same kind of hum that had followed me in the east tunnels was back. Stronger, brighter, like it had been waiting. I opened the panel again. All the breakers were live. Every circuit in that wing was drawing power. I traced the feed back to the main grid. Someone had routed clean voltage straight into the junction lines and bypassed the timer lock, but not during the day. The log showed a schedule. Power kicked in every night at exactly 12:01 a.m. and shut off at 4:00 on the dot. No one had marked the changes. No one had signed off, but someone was using that wing, and they didn't want it logged. I tried to act like I wasn't spooked. Took my cart down through the West Hall, pretending I was just inspecting outlets. The halls had been cleaned, not just swept, polished, like they were prepping for company. The smell of bleach was sharp in the air, almost sweet. Made my throat itch. Down near room 8, I saw a fresh coat of paint. The old pale green had been covered in flat white, the kind that reflects too much light, that makes you feel like you're under observation. I kept walking. Eventually, I reached a room that had no number, just a symbol, 2 interlocked hourglasses with a crown floating above them, hand-drawn in marker on the glass of the door. Looked like a child had done it. The lines were shaky, uncertain. I didn't go in. Instead, I backtracked to the admin wing, the one I'd found the VHS in. My keycard shouldn't have worked there, but it did, and sat down at one of the old workstations, popped off the back panel and hardwired into the security loop. It took a little fiddling. Most of these systems were built to run silent. No outward signals, no uplinks, just internal capture and record. But whoever had worked here before hadn't wiped the admin cache. I found a login labeled curriculum. Password was just a string of numbers, repeating digits, easy enough to crack. And then the feeds opened. Dozens of camera windows blinked to life across my screen, all of them labeled with cryptic names. Room Beta 6C, Hall 39. I selected the one marked Cycle Archive. It brought up a batch of files labeled Teaching Cycle 6B, Internal Use Only. The footage wasn't old. It started 2 weeks ago, and it was still being updated. I clicked on the most recent clip, time-stamped 12:44 a.m. the night before. The camera view was angled down at the loading bay out back. 3 white vans pulled in, unmarked, windows blacked out. The headlights stayed on while the back doors opened. Children stepped out. Not many, maybe 6, all wearing the same gray uniforms from the tape. Same tight braids, same blank expressions. They were led by 2 adults in plain black clothes, no words spoken, no noise at all, just the shuffle of footsteps as they were ushered inside. Through the service doors, down the hallway marked West Sublevel. None of them were brought back out. I checked the footage from the next night. Same vans, same children, same uniforms. Different movements. Now they walked in formation, hands behind their backs. One stumbled. A tall woman in black stepped forward and whispered something into the child's ear. The girl straightened. They kept moving. I fast-forwarded through the week. The same children appeared again and again. Same faces. No new arrivals. They were always led inside, never out. But something else changed. Not them. Their rooms. Walls that were plain on Monday now had strange geometric patterns painted on them by Wednesday. Desks were moved, then returned. Chairs replaced with stools. By Friday, the lighting had been dimmed in one wing and turned violet in another. In one frame, I saw a girl standing in front of a mirror, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Behind her, on the wall, the phrase had returned. The lesson must be learned. I leaned back in my chair, stomach tight. They weren't changing the students. They were changing the school. Like it was being shaped around them, adapted, rehearsed. I exited the security client, wiped the session log, and headed straight for the electrical closet in the West Wing, the place where I'd first noticed the power reroute. I popped open the upper cabinet and pulled down the old maintenance files. Tucked behind the paper schematics, someone had taped a folded piece of thick cardstock to the back wall. Hand-written in black pen, the ink blotched in places, like it had been done in a hurry. Phase 3 Curriculum Initiation. Below that, in tight spiral handwriting that wound around itself. For those who see the crown, memory will not hold. And just above that, the same symbol I'd seen on the unnumbered door, and an hourglass inside a crown. I stared at it until my vision blurred, until I couldn't tell which way the symbol was turning. I closed the panel and stepped back into the hallway. The lights flickered, just once, and that soft hum returned. Not buzzing, not mechanical. More like breathing. The school wasn't just a place. It was listening, and it had already started teaching. Chapter 5. The Chalkboard Room. It started with a breaker panel that shouldn't have existed. I was tracing a power anomaly through the lower sublevel, one of the newer feeds rerouted to the media bay, when I found it tucked behind a hanging sheet of insulation marked, "Don't adjust." The tag was fresh, not dusty or yellowed like everything else. I peeled it back and saw the outline of a breaker box, but there was no record of it in the grid, not on the blueprints, not in the voltage maps. Nothing. I unlatched the panel. Behind the breakers there was no wiring, just a hollow cavity with a metal latch inside. I stared at it for a long time before pressing down. The wall groaned. Not a creak, a groan, like metal waking up from a long sleep. Then a seam appeared. The panel shifted and swung open like a door. Behind it, a stairwell. No lights, no ventilation, just air that hadn't moved in decades, and the sound of gravity waiting to pull me in. Then, I didn't report it, didn't radio it in, just left my cart behind and stepped through with my flashlight. The stairs were narrow and steep, made of poured concrete, worn smooth in the middle from feet, many of them, over time. My boots echoed on the steps like I was in a well. The walls dripped with condensation. Every 15 steps or so, a rusted pipe crossed overhead, humming faintly, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The descent took longer than it should have. I counted 84 steps before I reached the bottom. There was only one door. Deal. No knob. Just a small handprint-shaped pad at shoulder height. Dead, but worn. Someone had used it before. The door wasn't locked, not anymore. It had been left slightly ajar. Just enough for light to spill through from inside. I pushed it open and stepped into the chalkboard room. It was bigger than I expected, maybe 30 feet wide, with a high arched ceiling and 3 walls covered floor to ceiling in chalkboards. Not the green kind from classrooms. These were black, decaying, almost soft-looking under the flashlight beam. Years of chalk dust clung to every inch. Layers upon layers of words scratched and overwritten, again and again, like someone had been writing lessons here for decades, but never erasing them, just burying them under the next. My light caught on a few of the phrases, still legible beneath the smear of white dust and forgotten lessons. She speaks through silence. No touching, no crying, no language. The lesson must be learned. Some were written in block letters, others in childlike cursive. One phrase repeated near the top corner, again and again, like a punishment line. I will not be seen until I am remembered. The air in the room was thick, not just stale, heavy, like the dust had weight to it, like the words themselves were pressing down. There was no sound except my own breath. No humming this time, no tapping. But the silence wasn't empty, it was loaded, expectant. In the center of the room sat a film projector, real old, analog crank with a cracked lens and flaking tape on the arms. Next to it, a stack of film reels. Not the usual black plastic cases. These were translucent, like X-ray film, with numbers scratched into them by hand. Some had names, some didn't. All of them looked brittle as ice. I picked one at random, the second reel from the top. The label read only Session/Hourglass/1998. I slipped it onto the arm, threaded it slowly, gently. My hands shook more than I'd like to admit. There was no screen, just a flat, white section of wall between the chalkboards. When I flicked the crank, the machine groaned, then clicked softly as the reel spun into life. And then the image appeared. Rainy, black and white, handheld. The hallway, familiar but not. Same architectural layout as the main campus upstairs. Same crown molding, same square columns. But older. Dirtier. The camera moved slowly down the corridor. There were no lights overhead, just candles flickering in wall brackets every 10 feet or so. Everything looked soaked in shadow. Then she appeared. Oprah. Walking slowly, deliberately, in silence. She wore a long black dress, sleeves to the wrists, hands clasped behind her back. Her hair was tied up into a simple braid. No jewelry, no shoes. Behind her, 5 children followed, barefoot, eyes cast downward. Each child had tape across their mouths, not duct tape, not cloth, custom-made strips that had been printed with black letters. Witness only. The camera moved back, keeping pace. Oprah never looked at the children, never touched them. She moved like she knew every creak in the floor, like she'd walked that corridor 1,000 times. The children followed without question, never breaking step. They reached a door at the end, on it the hourglass crown. She opened it and stepped inside. The children hesitated for just a second. Then the camera glitched. The image rippled like water, a full-screen distortion like the film had been soaked and dried wrong. And then she turned, just for a second. She turned back to the camera. Her face was clear at first. Then it fractured, bleached. Not like bad resolution or overexposure. It fractured, like her face had too many layers, and they couldn't agree on what it was supposed to be. Her eyes stayed still, but the rest of her shifted left and right, like the film couldn't hold her form. Like the camera shouldn't be watching. The reel stuttered. The light grew hot. Then the image disappeared. The film jammed in the sprockets and caught fire in a blink. I yanked the crank back, but it was too late. The acrid smell of burning acetate filled the room. The reel melted in seconds. Smoke rose in a thin, silent spiral. I staggered back, coughing, hands shaking. When the smoke cleared, the words on the chalkboard behind the projector had changed. I swear they had. Fresh words, centered in perfect print. No rewinding, no release, no forgetting. I backed out of the room. Didn't bother closing the door behind me. Didn't count the stairs on the way up. Didn't breathe until I was outside, standing in the gravel lot with dust on my hands and the taste of burned silence in my throat. I don't know what that room was meant for, but it wasn't storage. And those films weren't lessons. They were records of something we weren't supposed to survive seeing. Chapter 6, Student 43 spoke. I wasn't looking for anything. Not that day. I was just trying to stay above water, act like I still had a job to do, and not 100 questions folding in on themselves inside my chest. I told myself if I stayed focused on the work, on the wires, the voltages, the panels, I'd forget the look on that girl's face when the tape glitched. I'd forget the phrase on the chalkboard, the bare feet, the sealed mouths. But the school didn't want to be forgotten. It kept showing me things, calling me deeper. I found the report tucked behind a rusted conduit map in the comms substation. The locker door had warped with humidity, wouldn't close right. Inside was a folder, damp, half-molded, but still legible. No logo, just a faded label on the tab. Incident 7B, Student 43, breach of instruction. It had dust like it hadn't been touched in years. I sat on the floor and flipped it open with dirty gloves. It wasn't long, just a few printed sheets, no more than 3, but what was there made my skin crawl. The report described a breach event during what was labeled a simulated lockdown, teaching cycle 6B. According to the typed lines, Student 43 vocalized independently and outside of structured interval protocol. The rest of the language was clinical, cold in a way I hadn't seen before, even in military documents. Student 43 activated speech without prompt. Temporal interval breached by 6.3 seconds. Surrounding students displayed autonomic freeze response. No domino reaction. Subject was removed, not re-recorded. No name, no age, no description. Just a number. And the phrase not re-recorded. I slipped the page. There should have been footage. The report mentioned camera C6 Delta. I marked it mentally, planning to check the archive. But someone had already tried. A line at the bottom said, "Footage inaccessible, flagged under exception clause, silence loop authority designate OW." I didn't know what CLR meant, but I recognized the initials. Oh well. Oprah Winfrey. Not even hidden anymore, just embedded in the permissions, like a signature no one expected anyone to read. I shoved the papers back into the folder and stood up, suddenly lightheaded. There was a second locker to the left, unmarked. I hadn't opened it before. Its lock was long busted, dangling useless. Inside was nothing but loose wires, a dead radio, and an old cassette tape in a paper sleeve. The label was written in marker. Worn, smudged. Barely there. Studio 43, final reflection. It wasn't in the report, it wasn't logged. But it was real. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. I found an old field recorder in my bag. One of those cheap digital conversion players I kept around for archiving diagnostics. I slotted the tape in and pressed play. At first, silence, then static, then breath. Not heavy at first, not like panic, more like someone trying to keep it together. You could hear the shallow inhale, the held breath, the effort of someone trying to stay quiet the way they'd been taught. Then the crying started. Small, controlled, not weeping. Just the kind of tears that leak when you've been silent too long and your body stops asking for permission. Then, finally, a voice. A girl's voice. Off. Barely above a whisper. I thought we were learning to lead. A pause. A sniffle. Not to forget. That sentence did something to me. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like my stomach dropped through the floor. The words sounded too real, too uncoached, like they weren't supposed to be heard, not just by me, but by anyone. Then the voice changed. Not the girl's. A second voice layered underneath, low and warm, like silk pulled across bone. Oprah's voice. Only the quiet are remembered. The two voices overlapped, not in conversation, but in contradiction. The girl desperate. Oprah calm. The tape hissed louder. The girl whispered something again, unintelligible this time. Then silence. But the tape didn't stop. The static just kept going. Dulling, looping. A low thrum beneath it, almost like a heartbeat made of white noise. I tried to stop the tape. It didn't respond. I pressed eject. Nothing. The player kept spinning. The static got louder. And then I heard it. A breath that wasn't mine. Not on the tape. Behind me. I turned. No one was there. I yanked the tape from the player forcefully, and it finally popped out. The machine stopped. The static cut. I sat there for a full minute staring at that little black rectangle in my hand, the words on the label still shimmering under the dirt. Final reflection. Not testimony, not evaluation, not even punishment. Just reflection, like she'd already been erased. Like that was all she was allowed to leave behind. Student 43 spoke, and for that, she disappeared. But her voice stayed, because somewhere inside that school, the silence remembers everything. Even the ones it tries to bury. Chapter 7. The faculty were mirrors. There was a hallway I hadn't walked yet, northwest wing, blocked by plywood and warnings about water damage and roof instability, which was laughable. We were 3 floors underground, but I'd found its access key buried inside the metadata of a long-expired maintenance ticket. Just a 4-digit code left behind in the internal notes section, 3442, written next to a line that simply read, Archive requested OW clearance. Archive requested OW clearance. I entered the hallway just after 2 a.m. The power in that wing was cold, breakers untouched, no lights overhead, just the soft red glow of exit signs and my flashlight painting arcs on the floor. There were only 3 doors in that corridor, all identical, iron frames, reinforced glass slits. No labels, no handles, but the third one gave when I pressed my shoulder into it. Inside, a low-ceilinged records room. Half the shelves were collapsed or rotted, the smell of mold thick in the air. Dead computers lined the back wall, screens warped, keyboards melted into brittle sheets, and at the center, under a plastic tarp, was a filing cabinet, still locked. I forced it open with a screwdriver. Inside were folders. Dozens. Each stamped not with names, but positions. Reflection Assistant, Tier 1. RA, minus observation phase. Supervising, mirror. Hallway protocol. Not a single personal identifier. Just titles, ranks, and faces. Each folder held a single photograph. At first, they looked like staff ID shots, grainy, gray backgrounds, shoulder-up framing. But something was wrong. In one folder, marked RA 1983, the photo showed a stern-looking woman in a long black blouse, hair in a tight bun, no smile. The next folder, RA 1997, showed the same woman, same clothes, same posture, Not just similar, identical. Next, Rad 2010. Same face, same exact face. No aging, no change, not even the lighting was different. This wasn't digital duplication. These were analog records, physical photographs, printed on old gloss stock. No chance of copy-paste or AI manipulation. They were the same people across decades. I took 6 of the folders, slipped them into my coat. On the way out, I made one call to a number I hadn't dialed in years. An old contact from a different life, a man named Carson who used to clean the tunnels before they were the school. He answered after 3 rings. Static. Then, "You're on the wrong side of the glass, brother." I met him 2 days later, just before dusk, in a trailer deep off-grid. No address, no mail, just solar panels and a shed full of broken radios. His eyes were tired. His hands trembled. I didn't ask why he left. He told me anyway. They weren't teachers, he said. Not one of them. You didn't see them unless you broke a rule. You could walk that whole damn place for years and never spot a face. But the second a kid talked out of turn or touched the wrong wall or looked back when they weren't supposed to, he trailed off, took a slow drag on his cigarette. He appeared, silent, right behind you, like a shadow that only forms when you do something wrong. That's why we called them mirrors. They didn't speak, they didn't move unless you broke something in yourself first. I showed him the folders. He didn't flinch. "That's them," he said. "Always has been. I saw one in 92, same face as the one from 74. You know what I think?" I waited. They don't age because they're not on this schedule. Whatever's down there, whatever rules that place, it's got its own clock. He reached into his coat and pulled out a tiny strip of paper, folded, weathered. "The last thing I ever wrote before I left," he said. "Keep it, but don't read it until you hear the bell." I unfolded it that night, curious. It said, "If you hear the bell after 3 a.m., don't answer it. That's when she walks the tunnels herself." That should have been enough. It wasn't. Later that night, I went back to the AV hub in the east stairwell. I told myself I was just double-checking some wiring, but I couldn't stop thinking about those folders. About the girl on the tape. About the phrase burned into the chalkboard like it had been written yesterday. I was halfway through logging the junction voltages when the lights flickered. First the ceiling, then the floor, then my monitor, a simple analog screen, bled white across the surface like someone pouring milk over the pixels. Then I heard it. The bell. It wasn't a chime. Not a school bell. It was old, hollow, the kind you'd hear in a monastery before dawn or during funerals. 3 slow rings. Ding. Pause.
Ding.
Pause. And then silence. Except not silence. My radio, which hadn't picked up a signal in days, clicked alive on its own. Through the static came a whisper. A girl's voice. Close. Breathless.
She watches, and the pencil breaks in your mind before your hand can move. Then static again. I stared at the radio, the words hitting me like ice. The pencil breaks in your mind. Your hand before your hand can move. That's not discipline. That's a ratio. That's training you not just to obey, but to forget you ever wanted to resist. Packed up. Left the AV hub without another look. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I didn't write anything down, afraid the paper itself might scream. That was 3 nights ago. I haven't heard the bell since. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see them, the mirrors. Lined up behind the chalkboard walls, waiting. Not to punish, not even to teach, just to reflect what you've already done. Because once you've seen them, you already broke the rule.
Chapter 8. I failed the lesson. I told myself I was done. I packed my gear, every cable, every tool, every voltage chart I'd faked over the past few weeks, all shoved into a single canvas bag. The thumb drive with the copied footage was in my jacket pocket, triple encrypted, air-gapped, sealed in a sleeve of foil just to be safe. I left the folders behind. Something about taking them felt wrong, like bringing dead things into the world. I hadn't slept in 30 hours. I hadn't eaten in 16, but I was ready to walk, ready to hit the highway, burn south through Georgia, and never say the word school again. Before I left, I checked one last thing. I told myself it was just cleanup, just a systems check to make sure the next guy wouldn't walk into a blown fuse or a smoking sub-panel. But it wasn't that. It was guilt. I opened up the AV terminal, bypassed the corrupted UI, typed in the manual override to access the live feed archive. I don't even know why I chose camera 6C. Maybe because it was the one flagged during the Student 43 incident. Maybe because it was the only one that ever gave me something true. The feed came alive, grainy and flickering, like always. The chalkboard room. And she was there. One of the girls from the old tape, gray uniform, barefoot, hair in braids. She was pacing. Not like a child, like a prisoner. Each time she reached the edge of the frame, she stopped, turned, and walked back, over and over again. Her lips moved, no sound, but I knew the pattern. I knew the shape of the words. Let me forget, let me forget, let me forget. I froze. I stared at the feed, mouth dry, heart sinking, because I knew what that meant. She wasn't in a lesson anymore. She was stuck. Something about her had been left behind. An echo, a fracture, a loop. Or maybe she was still there, really there, waiting for someone who remembered her. My feet were already moving before I realized it. I grabbed my flashlight, left my bag, left my gear, left the exit wide open. I didn't care. Had to go back. Had to find her. I ran through the corridors, past the vent that whispered, past the locked door with the pencil symbol, past the hourglass crown scratched into glass. Everything smelled of ozone and chalk, like the air itself had been rewritten. I reached the stairwell, the one behind the fake breaker panel. 84 steps, same as before. My flashlight flickered on the 70th step. When I pushed open the door, the chalkboard room was dark. No candlelight this time. Just that low, electric breath of dead projectors and old dust. I stepped inside. The floor was cold. She was gone. The desks had been removed, the chalkboards scrubbed clean. Not erased, burned. The walls were scorched black, lines of melted chalk dripping like tears. In the center of the room sat one object. Her shoes. Gray canvas. Small. Worn thin. Next to them, a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with fingers I could barely feel. The writing was small, familiar. You can't help her if you don't remember her. I read it once, then again. Then the lights flickered, and I turned to leave. But the door was gone. Just smooth concrete behind me. No seam, no panel, no latch, no stairs. The room wasn't a room anymore. It was a trap.
The air hummed louder now. The ceiling lights clicked once, then again, then off. For a second, total darkness. Then, overhead, a single fluorescent strip buzzed back on. The wall in front of me lit up. Cycle 7 initiated. Below it, the same sentence repeated in faint, etched letters, as if scratched by hundreds of hands over time. Begin again. My flashlight was dead. My radio silent. I stood alone in the hallway, outside what used to be the chalkboard room. Or maybe I was still inside it. Hard to tell anymore. The air didn't move, the walls didn't echo. Even my breath felt like it was being held by something else. And the bell rang once, twice, 3 times. The hallway lights dimmed, and from deep within the concrete, I heard the voice, familiar now, low, patient, not angry, not loud, just inevitable. I failed the lesson, begin again. And I knew finally what this place had been trying to teach all along. Not discipline, not control, not silence, but forget the girl, forget the mirrors, forget the lesson. And when you forget, you begin again